Kadarius Toney is a Chief. Chris Jones is awesome from defensive end. And the Chiefs have a weirdly important and surprisingly important matchup this week against the Tennessee Titans. Let's talk some Chiefs. Welcome to the Chief of the North Monday mornings, or Monday mornings with the Chief of the North, whatever you feel like calling him. I'm Seth Kaiser, or Minnesota Chiefs fan, the Chief in the North. I'm going to add another name to that at some point soon, preferably something with like a King James version thing, Setheth, or something like that to make me sound more important. We do this every week. We talk about what's going on in Chiefs Kingdom. What are some of the most important storylines of the week? Obviously, this week we don't have a game to talk about because the Chiefs were on a bye week. Much needed bye week, in my opinion. They had some injuries, especially on the offensive line. We want to see Trent McDuffie get healthy. There's a number of players that are playing a little bit nicked up, which often happens about this time of the year. It's one of the reasons it's good to have a bye week about halfway through the season. But obviously the biggest story of the week, of the bye week, is the Chiefs executing a trade for Kadarius Toney, former first-round pick. I wrote about him pretty extensively on the Chief in the North newsletter, where I went through, basically what his film looked like from 2021 as well as from 2022. And honestly, if you're wondering why the Chiefs went looking for him, plays like this would be a pretty good place to start. And so I want to talk about Toney's film for just a couple minutes because that's one of obviously the biggest stories of the week. And I want to just talk about what I think the short and long-term plan is with him. You can find the entire article on, the Chief Minnesota Chiefsfan.substack.com, mnchiefsfan.substack.com, or bit.ly/Seth really hates money. So when people think about Kadarius Toney, they think about plays like this, where he creates extra yardage out of essentially nothing. And there's a reason why they think of that. That's what he's best known for. This is one of the more fun plays that you can find. Again, I went back, I reviewed 3 games out of 2021 on all 22. Then I looked at the snaps that he's got available in 2022 as well, and came away with some thoughts from that in terms of lack of productivity. But this is just a simple slant that, with his natural ability with the ball in his hands, his quickness, his kind of odd form of movement, is kind of a herky-jerky type guys. He's able to create extra yards, kind of a something out of nothing. It's one of the places where he wins. He moves in ways that are unusual. And so this is another play where you see that this is probably one of the better routes that he ran in most of the games that I watched. It's almost a down the field whip route. And the way that he can move, the way that he can shift and change directions is just a unique thing. And that's one of the things that people notice about him that jumps off the screen. And the ability with the yards after catch with the ball in his hand, that's the thing that pops off the most. That's the thing that most people are going to focus on. That's in my opinion, when you're talking in terms of 2022, because he's coming into Andy Reid's offense. Everyone knows it's a hard offense to learn. Everyone knows that he struggled with some injuries, and everyone knows that it takes time to be implemented into Reid's system. That said, I assume they're going to try to use him at least somewhat in 2022, and that is where you're going to probably see the initial usage of him is yardage creation, the ability to catch the ball, make a few moves, and just create yards out of thin air. We know Andy loves to use wide receiver screens. We know he loves to use jet sweeps and other motions like that. Those are things that Toney he absolutely excels at. You can kind of think of it in terms of the Mecole Hardman role, which of course leads many people to ask, what's going to happen with Mecole Hardman. I think Hardman has already carved out a niche for himself in the offense. I think Reid's going to do some fun things, having them both on the field at the same time, threatening going 2 different directions at once. I think there's some fun things you can do there, but it's definitely going to carve somewhat into Hardman's, let's call it gimmicky touches, those quick touches where they're trying to just get the ball in his hands and say, hey, create something. Hardman's good at it. Toney, on film, when he's healthy, is better. He plays a little bit stronger. He's quicker. He's just a little bit better with the ball in his hands, although he doesn't have Hardman's top end speed. So I think when you're talking in terms of 2022, that's primarily the role you're going to see for him, barring him unexpectedly picking up a huge swath of the offense a lot faster than you think you might be able to. Long term is kind of the more interesting conversation with Toney. And some of the snaps that I found of his that were more interesting weren't the snaps that really stood out to people in terms of creating a ton of yards after the catch or anything like that. But it was his ability to win in non-traditional ways, running traditional routes. So here we've just got him running a simple slant route. And this is an interesting play to me, not because he wins on a slant. A lot of guys win on a slant, especially when a quarterback starts with inside leverage and then moves too far towards the outside to compensate. But watch where he plants. And this is one of the things that I wrote about here, is when he cuts, he's actually he hasn't planted his outside foot yet. And that's one of the things that makes Toney unique as a player, is his ability to cut at odd angles. He's got a weird amount of body control. And while he's very, very quick, it's not just the fact that he's quick. It's the fact that he can cut from weird angles that gives him advantage over most defenders. And that's where I'm interested in him, is long term. How often can we see routes like this one where he makes a nice cut? You see him press into the defender, deal with some physicality, shrug him off, and make separation. Those are the plays that actually intrigue me the most, and they happen more frequently than I anticipated. When I was going through his 2021 film, I found more traditional wide receiver stuff that he appeared to have the skill set for. He dealt with power a little bit better than I thought he would. He's built relatively thick for a guy his size. He's not a guy who weighs 180 pounds or 175. He's more like 190, 195. Not a big guy, certainly. But he also is not a guy who can't handle contact at all, and it would, in fact, run through it at times. Not necessarily with the ball in his hand, but when he's on his routes. Physicality didn't necessarily stop him in his tracks. And that's something that's really interesting to see with a guy with his combination of speed and quickness and his ability to cut from unique angles, kind of an odd amount of body control. If you wanted to ask me, and there's more in the article itself, go check it out if you feel like it. The route that I saw from 2021 that intrigued me the most was this one. Not one of the, highlight reel routes, one of the ones where he created, 20 yards out of thin air. Again, I think that's where he might have the biggest chance to make an impact in 2022. But this right here, this is where I see some long-term potential. Where you see a little more basic route running, although he adds his own flair to it in terms of how he turns. But you see him fight through a little bit of contact, swat hands away, come back to the ball, and make a catch with his hands, knowing that he's got some contact coming. That right there is how you can win on a snap-by-snap basis, as opposed to counting on big plays. Frankly, Toney's film was better than I expected for a guy that I was thought of as kind of a gimmicky guy, a gadget guy. He really, on film, he shows the ability to separate. He shows the ability to deal with contact. He shows the ability to catch the ball well, and shows extreme yards after catch ability. The two things with him: is he a knucklehead, as Ryan was talking about last week, and how is his health? Those are going to be the two things with him. If those things are fine, I expect him to succeed in Andy Reid's offense and have a substantial role moving forward. I'm not sure I would expect that in 2022. In 2022, the biggest impact he can make is by creating yards. The Chiefs have two of the best yardage creators in the NFL, and Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes, but they used to have Tyreek Hill as well. And having a guy who can create offense when some other things are stalling out, that's a big deal. And additionally, a guy like Toney who can do all sorts of things. He can do wildcat stuff. He can do jet sweep stuff, the screens, running, even your basic slants, whip routes. Those are things that he can work into the offense this year. And it just adds one more guy that you can count on perhaps to make those catches in tough situations that is difficult to cover one-on-one. It's going to be interesting watching moving forward. Another thing that I wrote about last week that I would really love for people to check out, simply because it's something that I find really interesting, is the fact that the Chiefs are playing Chris Jones at defensive end. We talked about it a little bit last week, but seriously, go check it out. and smile, because it is one of the most fun things you'll read. It's unlocked for everyone. If you just check out, Chris Jones is dominating from defensive end, and he really is, because they're using it more sparingly. They're using it as a changeup rather than a fastball, and they're specifically finding ways, for example, lining up George Karlaftis right next to him here to occupy that right guard. They're finding ways to scheme up one-on-one matchups for Jones, which is something that they've done in the past, but not to the extent that they are this year. I'm excited about it. It's something that I think they're going to keep doing as they continue to maybe search for another body along the defensive line to help them generate pressure. Because right now, Jones is the only player who's really generating pressure or winning one-on-one at a higher rate than average. So those are two things that I think are just interesting this week as the Chiefs move into an oddly important and maybe surprisingly important, I don't know. I mean, the Tennessee Titans are one of those teams that over the last 2 years, they're never really thought about as one of the best, even 3 teams in the AFC. But last year, they won the AFC. Now, they weren't able to make it to the AFC Championship. In fact, I believe they might have lost the divisional round. Well, they did, because they did make it to the AFC Championship. And so it's easy to kind of take them for granted. But it's worth noting the last time the Chiefs played them, the Titans absolutely shellacked them. And it was a bad game. It was one of those games that really – it was the worst game I've seen Mahomes play start to finish. Unlike the AFC Championship game against the Bengals, where he was exceptional in the first half, had a really tough second half. The interesting thing about this game that is kind of flying under the radar, and I don't know if that's because people take the Titans for granted. I have no idea. But with the Bills being at 6-1 and solidly on top of the AFC, which is something, the Chiefs gave to them, it is what it is. And the Chiefs, by losing to the Colts, they put themselves in a situation where it's not just the tiebreaker. They're actually 2 games back. But the Bills, they're solidly atop the AFC, 6-1. And then you've got the Ravens at 5-3, the Jets at 5-3. They haven't had their bye week yet. And then the Titans are 5-2, tied with the Chiefs for second place in the AFC in terms of record. Another thing with the Titans, they've won 5 in a row. Now, they're an easy team to take kind of for granted because they've had injuries. Tannehill was playing all right. Obviously, he didn't get the start this last week. Derrick Henry had a really slow start to the season. But again, the last time the Chiefs played the Titans, they got the daylights beat out of them. And it's a low-key, very, very important game for the Chiefs in that if they beat the Titans, they can still stay in the driver's seat for the second place, the second seed, which obviously doesn't get a bye week, but you do give yourself the opportunity for home field advantage against everyone but Buffalo. Will you probably be playing Buffalo in the AFC Championship in Buffalo? Probably. But home, away, that sort of thing hasn't really been that big an issue for the Chiefs. In fact, one can argue they played better on the road than they have at home in the last several years. It's just the truth. Obviously, having an Arrowhead advantage in the playoffs is a big deal, but it's not something they can't overcome. However, if they lose to the Titans, they drop to 5-3, and suddenly they're tied with the Ravens. They're tied with the Jets. They're tied with the Dolphins. They're tied with, they're perhaps tied with the Bengals. Suddenly they find themselves in the middle of a very muddled AFC picture, and additionally give the Chargers a chance to catch up to them in the division. That's what happens when you drop a meaningless game like the one to the Colts that they should never, ever, ever have lost. They cost themselves like 3 touchdowns. We've been over that ad nauseum, but that makes these early season games much more important. When you drop what are supposed to be the gimmies, suddenly you put yourself in a much tighter position. The one thing I would note with the Titans, they have won 5 in a row. They opened their season losing a nail biter to the Giants, who people judged the Titans based off that. But you know what? The Giants have beaten a lot of teams since then. And they're sitting there right now at 6-2. It doesn't mean quite as much as maybe we thought it meant originally. Now, then they got shellacked by the Buffalo Bills, a really, really good team, probably the best team in the NFL right now, other than maybe the Eagles. And then they rattle off 4 wins in a row against Vegas, Indianapolis, Washington, Indianapolis again, and Houston. Those are not good football teams, but winning 5 games in a row is hard. The reality is the Chiefs lost to the Colts. And so they're not a team to be taken lightly, and it's a game that's oddly important in the AFC standings because by winning, the Chiefs can keep themselves at least in the driver's seat. Where you've got the Bills, you got everyone kind of chasing them, and they can keep that pressure on the Bills to keep winning week in and week out. And that's their job at this point. Wait for the Bills to stumble because it's tough to win, 12 games in a row in the NFL. And eventually, odds are the Bills are going to have a game where they struggle a little bit, whether it's against, their schedule is much easier than the Chiefs moving forward, but that doesn't mean they don't have all gimme games. They do play some tough. Do play some tough teams. They come up against the Jets next, which oddly enough is a tough game. The Vikings, they're not an easy out at this point. The Patriots are always goofy. Who knows what happens with them? They do have to play the Jets again. They got to play the Dolphins again. They've got to play the Bengals. There are opportunities there for the Chiefs to bank up some ground, but they can't do that if they fall multiple games behind. And once again, even taking the Bills out of the equation, there's the Bills. And right now, there's the Chiefs at the very front of a pretty crowded pack here in terms of teams that have started to win some games. Now that the Bengals have kind of started to catch fire, the Ravens have won a few games. It really is you can stay at the head of that, or you can fall right into this pack that you can drop suddenly from the second seed once the playoffs arrive to like the sixth. Depending on what happens with your division. And again, giving the Chargers an opportunity to catch them. That's not a place that you want to be the next time you play the Chargers, where you 100% need to win. So those are kind of the storylines for this week. I hope that you guys enjoy it. It should be a good week. It'll be a lot of fun to see how they try to incorporate Toney. It'll be a lot of fun to see how they continue to incorporate Jones at defensive end. In the meantime, either way, it's going to be a great week to be a Chiefs fan.